Yeah, so I see that. You get to a place where it's like, whoa, you know, like I have too much going on right now that I care about sustaining its current continuity to risk disrupting it significantly for what might ultimately just be selfish indulgence, even if it has a spiritual or beauty or positive inclination.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I will add to that, a caveat to that, just for some listeners, is that in my early days, I was pulling myself away from alcoholism. And so as soon as I got a kind of the inclination to go to the bottle again, I knew it was like sirens going. And that was the time to go to the mushroom and consult the mushroom.
Mm-hmm.
Mushroom gave me my lesson. My addiction was gone temporarily, and it took a process, a long time to kind of free yourself from that behavioral pattern.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, in the early days, I'm not saying it's not useful. It is very useful if you're inclined to it, but we can just get a little bit flippant with it and use it for any old reason. It can also be damaging. And
Yeah, and you know what? It's interesting. I want to point to how it can be damaging in a positive way as well, you know, because thing is that every time you went to take the mushrooms when you were like, you know, the bottle seems like a pretty good idea right now. And the mushrooms are like, no, what you're doing is you're damaging that part of yourself. You're breaking it. I came up with this metaphor. I'm going to share it with you and your listeners. Just don't tell anyone else. All right. And it's this idea. It's from something that I'm writing right now. Oh, ooh. No, I'm getting a strong signal from the muse not to share it. Okay, point is that we want it to break us in certain places, right? And not in others. And sometimes we don't recognize what the consequences of it breaking us where we want it to break us, right? And those consequences in particular are that when, for example, for yourself, I imagine that when you got less and less into alcohol, the relationships that you with people who you thought were like your good friends, that were relationships where they also drank alcohol and that was their thing, progressively deteriorated. Is that sort of a fair assessment?
yeah, it's a byproduct of anybody that gets sober is that you can no longer hang in those communities. Number one is temptation of being tempted to be back to the bottle. Number two is the conversation is terrible. It used to be so funny, but now it's no longer as humorous as it once was.
Yeah, and something else to be said, call back to relationships. You know, if you're in a relationship and you are both there and it's working because you're both a particular kind of person and the way that you've structured your relationship is to hold a particular trajectory of becoming. You know, what you do, like your being, your doing, and your becoming are in alignment with each other. And all of a sudden you start taking psychedelics and you go on a totally different track,
Yeah.
then the chances are, unless the relationship can coherently sustain that, then that relationship is going to die away too. And so that's something, I think that's one of the possible harms, which in the long run could be very positive about psychedelics that people don't necessarily talk about, which is that when you start to become a different person, you probably won't want to be around the people who are once your friends. And guess what? They won't want to be around you either. Right? If those
Yeah.
relationships can't hold your becoming. Now, this is weird because you also need relationships to keep you from going off the rails, to check you. But also some of the relationships are currently checking you into a reality that's not serving you. So this is a very complicated and nuanced dynamic, which again, I'm pretty keen on encouraging people to work with a coach or guide or whatever. Although I also think that at some point we get coherent enough in our something that we can just have our thing with the substance, whatever it is. And maybe there's a time where that's what needs to happen. So no hard lines here. But that's just something that's an interesting complexity to hold. I don't know the answer to that. You know, the answer to that is found only in the heart of each individual person as it is assessed step by step along the way. But that's some things to think about.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And you know, luckily we live in an era where we have so much online content that works as a guide or support as well for those that don't have one in person.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the whole point, really, of what we do in remembering ourselves sharing circles, where we're getting people together and entheogenic and to discuss their entheogenic experiences via Zoom, because they've lost their friendships and lost those groups that they used to hang with, and those old relationships have kind of fallen away with the old ego, the first ego death, second ego death, whatever it is. They can then come and kind of meet like-minded individuals where they're not going to feel judged. And the technology that we have available, where you can just turn on an Alan Watts talk, you can just turn on a Ram Dass talk, you can tune into a podcast, and you can have this. It's like that it works as support. And I think as a community, it's obviously something you've pioneered 8 years ago, but as a community, it's up to all of us to try and reach out and make sure people have got that support where they need it, because some aren't so fortunate to live in like progressive locations like Colorado and things like that, where there's a lot going on, or Bali, where I am, where it's like hippie yoga central. Some people are in places where there's absolutely no support network. And so this really is important. And that's the feedback I get. I'm sure you receive similar feedback.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, do you want to add to that, James, or?
No, I don't think so. I think I would say that it's weird. This, what I'm about to suggest, it's a weird nuance, but because some people, I think it's a good goal for us to have in general in life, to both be and have people in our lives that can be trusted when they say, hey, I think you're going off the rails. Right. And sometimes we don't have that. And we have people who like, I smoke cannabis, I think you're going off the rails. Like, you need rehab now, you're a drug addict, because you're smoking a joint twice a week. Right. But there are other people who are like, if we're going to be exploring psychedelics and our friends come up to us and say, you sound confused, I think you need to step back from this for a little while, that we can trust those people, at the very least, that they care for us. And this is weird, but I feel like it serves us to work towards building relationships that are so clear and so secure and so based in really knowing each other, that there are times when you can trust that that person knows you better than you know yourself. And that when they say, hey, I think it's time to take a step back, that you can take a step back. And then if you take a step back and you realize, actually, after a few months, that person, you're like, yeah, I think you're kind of off base, maybe you go back in, or take a couple steps back. And after a few months, all of a sudden you're like, huh, that's interesting. I'm having much healthier and happier and more coherent experiences now that I'm not taking acid once a week, or whatever. And that's complicated, because that's not just someone that you can find. Those are relationships that you need to build. And then those relationships are hard to build because it requires everybody on board with the same thing. And also everybody's carrying a lot of baggage that makes intimacy and that type of showing up, A, unfamiliar, B, it's difficult, period, especially in the beginning. And C, it's scary for the wounded parts of us to have that kind of intimacy. And so, I don't know, this is not a coherent thought. This is just me kind of putting out something that's coming up for me that I'm thinking about, and just wondering and inviting people to wonder about, what does it mean and what does it take, and who can we have secure relationships with that can hold us in community as we have these journeys. Our journey of becoming, whether they be with psychedelics or not.
No, I think it is a coherent point to me, the what I'm hearing anyway. It's I think it's an important point. In a perfect world, we'd have that person there that could tell us, and we wouldn't feel judged by them in them telling us that, hey, you're going off the rails, like you're not in check with reality. And in a perfect world, we'd have that. But the transference and counter-transference and the issues on both sides make that a little bit more complex than you would hope it would be. I certainly have people that I check in with. I certainly have people that ask, how's it going? You seem to be glowing and all's looking very well, but are you still grounded? Like, do you remember us? And those those people, luckily, are my family. So they're people that I know and trust very much. So it is important, but like you say, not everybody has that. So
Mm-hmm.
so the community can kind of put themselves forward and do what we can.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
And something
James,
else to say, I just want to comment. Not everybody has that. And like I said, clear about finding that, but also becoming that, right? Because being that, we have to be careful that we're not caretaking or care vulturing or caretaking in a way that's actually self-harming. But generally, if there's something new you want to see in the world, zone zero is a good place to start. Like the self is a good place to start. And so not having that doesn't mean that it can't exist in your reality. You can be the initiator for those types of relationships. Just going back to psychedelic versus not psychedelic people, just don't push them to be a part of something that they don't want to be a part of. Yeah. Don't make it about yourself.